Patnaik, I'm sorry, Patnaik.
Sir, I rise to speak in favor and support of the Appropriation Bill 2022 and the Finance Bill 2022. However, while doing so, sir, I would like to make certain suggestions, certain concerns that India should be worried about, whether this government or when they were there, all of us should be worried about, all members of parliament, the entire country should be worried about. So Article 38 of our Constitution, amongst many other things, it says that the state shall in particular strive to minimize the inequalities in income and endeavor to eliminate inequalities in status, facilities and opportunities, not only amongst individuals, but also amongst groups of people residing in different areas or engaged in different vocations. My concern is, which I want to flag here, whether we have achieved this. So, allow me to quote the Gini coefficient, which is a measure of inequality in society. From the year 2000 to the current year, 20 years period, the Gini coefficient has increased from 74.7 in 2000 to 82.3 in 2020. So while we are talking about growth, the GDP growth, the economic growth, increasing the size of the cake, what we have actually increased also simultaneously is the inequality in society. We have to think about this. We have to think about our economic policy as to why the inequality is not decreasing. What we call as growth is not becoming as inclusive as we would have liked, where the GDP, economic GDP is increasing. The maximum increase was in fact during the period 2000 to 2006. Now if you look at Gini index, another indicator of the World Bank, it has also increased from 34.4 in 2004 to 35.2 in 2020. Amartya Sen once said that there is a kind of tolerance to inequality in this country. It is seen in what is considered acceptable as a means of judging the performance of the economy. If the incomes of a few people rise, that is treated as evidence for economy doing well. The tolerance for that idea is worrying. It's not only Amartya Sen. If you look at the 2017 World Bank report, they exactly say the same thing, because too much of inequality would give rise to social strife, civil strife, and the Arab Spring kind of situations. So currently, the economic survey says, I quote the economic survey, last year's economic survey, that the total wealth of the middle class, which is 40%, which was 45% of the total income wealth in 1981, it decreased to 22.9% in 2020. 3.2 crores people, middle income population, the size of the middle class decreased. 5 out of 6 multidimensionally poor are SC, ST or OBC. 12% of poor live in female-headed households. So therefore, we need to have greater investment in education, health, nutrition, and the purchasing power of people at the bottom of the pyramid, income wealth pyramid, has to increase. But it is very well said to demand all this and ask for all these things to happen unless we raise the revenues for it. The finance bill is a document which basically lays out the plan for raising revenues for it. Now, how do you do it? So, the tax GDP ratio, sir, in our country, if I quote the figures, it has been hovering around 10.7% in currently, and last 5 years, 9.9%, 11.22%. There has to be something to increase our tax GDP ratio. Some way, some method has to be devised. One of the ways which I am going to plead for here is and which I think is something that the finance bill has missed, is the reintroduction of wealth tax or a COVID tax. How do you generate resources for meeting social sector expenditure? I spoke in my budget speech, sir, that the social sector expenditure as a percentage of GDP, not in gross terms, has actually remained almost at the same level. Unless we increase that, obviously the inequality indexes will not improve. Now, I have, sir, certain figures to say that if you impose this tax, as per the Oxfam India report, 1% of wealth tax on the 98 billionaires would finance the Ayushman Bharat for more than 7 years. 1% tax on wealth of 98 billionaires can take care of total expenditure for school education and literacy. 2% tax on individuals with an income of over rupees 10 crores could increase the ministry's budget by an astounding 121%. I would plead that we need to do something to get this revenue so that we can spend on social sector. This is on the appropriation account in macro terms. Now let me go to the finance bill, which has significantly good things in terms of capping the long-term capital gains tax at 15%, the SOCO's notice being made mandatory before you readjust the taxes after a reassessment. There are many good things. The dispute resolution panel. But I think the biggest concern, as Sushil Modi ji was also saying, about the digital assets. While the definition is not clear and the regulations are not there, therefore naturally it is understood that the taxation guidelines are not very clear. He had made suggestions to increase the taxes. I leave it to that, but before that, very importantly, one has to reach the definition. What constitutes a virtual digital asset in an age in which technology is literally generating new virtual private digital assets almost every year, every second. There is a confusion over there as to the set-off of loss on VDA with capital gains on transfer of VDA. Now, if it happens during the same year, whether the set-off should be happening or not, on the same kind of VDA. Now, that's something I think needs clarification. On the TDS, the problem is of traceability. If the buyer may not even be able to identify the seller at all, the buyer may not be able to identify the seller. In that case, how do you collect that particular tax? And also the cost of acquisition. So I think the virtual digital assets ecosystem has to be defined in a much bigger and much broader way. Honorable Finance Minister had already clarified. I think we have to act very fast in this now that the tax has been imposed already. I will talk about the unexplained cash credit. I think it's a very good thing. Only problem is whether the trade payables, bank borrowings, and credit card payments would be included or not, because currently it looks as if they would get included. The faceless assessment scheme, sir, which everyone is talking about, and I'm sure each one of us who has been paying income tax has faced some kind of technical glitch or not. I think that still requires attention from the government to solve that. But more importantly, no acknowledgement is even given of a successfully filed submission. I think that is very important. Many taxpayers have told me about it. Now I come to the cess and surcharge, sir. So the cess and surcharge has increased 5 times during the last 10 years, 5-fold. 0.9% of GDP it was. In 2011 and 12, it has gone to 1.7% of GDP. While the cess and surcharge has increased, what has happened, however, is that the gross tax revenue has decreased from 10.4% of GDP to 9.9% of GDP. The result is a pressure on the state's finances, because the devolution to the states has decreased to that extent. And currently, if you take everything together, the devolution to the states has actually decreased to a 30% level, 30% of the gross tax revenue. Now, the CAG had recommended, the Comptroller Auditor General of India had recommended that the education cess and the health cess that is collected, there should be proper procedure for allocating it. I had spoken in my budget speech that it is actually currently being taken to actually fund the expenditure which was already meant to be there. It has not actually augmented it, because the cess is supposed to have augmented it in a specific or particular aspect of health or education. There is no cap on cess and surcharge. Honorable Chief Minister of Orissa, Naveen Patnaik, has repeatedly written to the center that let cess and surcharge be made a part of this shareable pool then, unless you put a cap on it and you spend it for a specific purpose as it was intended to be. So last point, sir. So last point is the Orissa's demands. I'll speak in very brief. We are moving in technology. The budget emphasized heavily on technology, rightly so. But 25% of villages in Orissa are without internet connection. 25%, 6,999 villages out of 25,000 villages. And it requires 2,500 mobile stations, towers, to meet this. When will that happen? Even now, 1,623 crore of GST compensation is pending. Subsidy to be returned by the FCI for procurement of paddy, which is one of our most significant agricultural operations, post-harvest operations, is still pending to be given. And there is no clarity as to whether Government of India would lift 15 lakh metric ton of fortified parboiled rice. About 12 lakh beneficiaries are still waiting for that Prime Minister's Awas Yojana houses. When we are having a budget which will address common people, all sections of society, I really do not understand why these specific areas of concern given by the state of Orissa could not be met. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Patnaik. The next speaker is V. Vijay Reddy.
Thank you, Deputy Chairman, sir. Vice Chairman, sir. Thank you. Sir, I raised to